Hey folks, Dr. Grimes here, and we are starting with this video our journey through the process of effective hiring. And the class is Human Resources Staffing, and our textbook is Strategic Staffing. And as you saw from the syllabus video that I did, the whole point of this is to learn how to hire effectively, how to get the right people who will be able to step in and make a difference right away, and who will hopefully be with us for a while and will make our organization successful in a way that is mutually beneficial to both the organization and the individual. If you meet their needs, they're happy, they stay, and they in turn help you meet your needs. So we begin the process in chapter 1, and also, as you saw in our textbook, we're not taking the chapters in order, but we do take chapter 1 first because it gives us the overview of what it is we're trying to do here. So hopefully, as we talk through this material in chapter 1, get an idea of what staffing is all about and why it's important, and different ways to think about staffing. During the course of these videos, as I am looking at not only the slides that are on our screen here, but also the notes that I used to create these slides, I've put little asterisks and things in the margins of my notes, which reminds me that there's a test question there, and I'll try to slow down a little bit when we get to material that you're going to need to remember for tests, so that you can identify a true, false, or multiple choice question later on. But that's enough of the overview in the background. Let's get started here. I'll say one more thing here. I'm feeling honestly a little bit uncomfortable. I'm kind of cramped into the corner of my desk, and my chair is lower than normal because I'm looking out the window right behind the computer screen here. At the beautiful GSW campus, the lake, which I can see from here, but that happens to be on the east side of the campus, and the sun is right above me right now. And I've been trying to find a place where I didn't have the sun hitting me in a distracted way. And you can see right on my shoulder here is where the sun's coming through the blinds. Normally I'd be recording from someplace like this. I've moved my camera and my screen so that I can be a little bit to the side of that, and it won't be quite so distracting. But I'm not filling up the screen like I'd like to because I can't get close enough to the camera, and I'm a little bit in the shadows because of where the sun is. Hopefully you can deal with that as you listen to this. Maybe it's even an incentive not to watch the thing, just to listen to it while you do something else. So here we go. Chapter 1, Strategic Staffing. Let's start off with some definitions. And first of all, what is staffing? Staffing is the process of finding people to fill the open positions in our organization. And there are different ways to go about doing that. Unfortunately, the way that most people have done it over time and still do it today is, how fast can we fill this slot? We are behind schedule since that person left. We've got to get somebody in here. Let's hire somebody that can do a reasonably good job. And unfortunately, what we find is that we went too fast a lot of the times, and we find somebody who's not exactly what we needed, or really is just kind of filling a slot on their schedule and looking to move on quickly. I've got to have employment. Here's a job. I'll do it for a little while, then we'll move on. And we end up doing the staffing process multiple times. Whereas if we did it right the first time and we took our time, yeah, it's uncomfortable that we have this position open for 2 months, and the people who work around this position are having to do both their job and parts of this job, and it's not pleasant, it's not happy, it's not easy. But if we will just do this thing right, then we will likely have a whole lot more success in the long term of getting the right people and getting them in permanent positions where they can contribute for a long time. But that's beyond the scope of this definition of staffing. Generally speaking, staffing is saying, hey, we've got an open position here, we need somebody to fill it, let's go find them. So the process of finding people to fill those open positions. Strategic staffing, however, is something a little different, and it is something you want to remember for a test. Strategic staffing, it goes beyond just filling open positions, because it involves, as you can see from the title, strategy. Strategy is thinking ahead and thinking about consequences and designing processes. So strategic staffing differs from normal staffing in the sense that it is future oriented. We're not just saying, oh my goodness, Johnny turned in his notice, we got to find somebody. It's saying, you know what, Johnny's going to be retiring soon, or Johnny doesn't seem to be real happy here and he might be leaving. So how do we make sure that we're ready if he does? So it is future oriented, and it is goal directed, which means that it's not just filling a chair with a breathing warm body, but it's finding somebody that not only can do the job that we have here now, but also has the capacity to grow and take on additional roles. So it's future oriented in the sense that maybe this job is not open now, but it might be soon. But it's also future oriented in the sense that not only do we want to fill this job now, but we want to have talent available to promote later. Future oriented, thinking ahead. What if kinds of thinking. Goal directed. Here's what we're trying to accomplish, not only right now, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now. We know we're eventually going to need a CEO. Why not start thinking about who we could hire today that might be ready to be a CEO in 10 years? And this process not only supports our strategy, but it also makes us a whole lot more effective. So remember the basics of this definition for test purposes. Strategic staffing has the concepts of future-oriented, it's what if, it's hypothetical, it's consequence-oriented. If we do this, what's the result? If we don't do this, what's the result? What's the benefit? What's the drawback? So it's future-oriented, it's goal-directed, it thinks about the overall organization and what our goals are, what our mission is, what our strategies are, and then how do we make this thing work a whole lot more smoothly. That's what strategic staffing is. There's a quote from the book, I think it is on page 3, it's the first full paragraph on that page. There's a partial paragraph that bled over from the previous page, and then there's this big paragraph, and this is inside that. Look at this and think about it for a second. Perhaps no other single activity has the potential to have as great an impact as identifying and obtaining the talent that the organization will ultimately use to produce its products or services. We might instinctively say that the most important thing about our organization is producing these tires, or it's about selling these bonds, or providing this service. But it's hard to do that if we don't have the right people. The greatest things in the world don't sell themselves. It's people that sell those things. The greatest services don't deliver themselves. It's people that deliver those services. So when we think about the importance of the people who are doing the things, it becomes a whole lot more easy to understand that if we have the right people, we're going to succeed. If we have the wrong people, we won't. And that it is the process of finding these people that is critical to the whole process. That is why you as HR people, especially, can really begin to get a lot of respect in your organization if you become known as the people that know how to find good talent. Managers who need people will trust you when you say, you know what, this is going to take a little bit of time. I'm going to get right on it, but we're going to find the right person for you. Now, Mr. Manager, you would love to have somebody tomorrow, but you don't want the wrong person tomorrow. You'd be willing to wait a week, maybe even 2 months, if we can get the perfect person. And I feel real comfortable that we can get the perfect person, because if we get the right people, it will have such a positive impact on what you're trying to accomplish here. And think about this, and give me an answer to this, Mr. Manager, Ms. Manager. Do you want to hire this position twice in the next 5 years, or once in the next 5 years? If we can hire them now in such a way that we get the right person who stays for 5 years, you don't have to go through this process again for 5, 10, 15 years. And that, it probably has some value. I'd be willing to trade off a couple of months right now to get 10 years of payback. And getting the right person increases the opportunity that you do that. So no other activity beyond staffing really has the potential to impact our organization like getting the right people. Here's another quote. It's also from page 3. It's in the middle of the second paragraph, I think, on that page. The companies who had a really clear idea of who they wanted to hire, and that had very, very clear standards that they were measuring their candidates against, significantly, consistently outperformed companies that just kind of took people as they showed up. That's really important for us to understand. If we want our organizations to be effective, not only do we have to know exactly what we're looking for, but we also have to have an idea of who we are looking for those things in. Think about it from the perspective of buying a car. If you just say, you know what, I need to buy a new car, and you go to the car lot, you got no idea what you're looking for, and just about everything seems to work, but most of them won't be long-term what you're really looking for. If, on the other hand, you have a pretty good idea of what you're looking for, I'm looking for 4 doors, I'm looking for a Hemi engine, I'm looking for a sunroof, I'm looking for this kind of safety features, I'm looking for this kind of technology, the more specific you get that list, the easier it is to find the perfect car because it has the things that are on that list. That's no different from looking for a spouse. When I was when I was dating and looking to get married, I had built in my head a kind of a checklist of what I was looking for in a spouse. She had to have these qualities. She had to have this kind of character. She had to have a good sense of humor. She had to have these kinds of values, and these things needed to be important. She had to be good with kids. She had to, want kids. She had to be kind of career-oriented. Lots of different things. And when you've got that specific list and you go out with somebody and you go, all right, you make these 3 things, but you don't meet these 4 things. Now you could say, is that really important? Or can I live without those 4 things? But the more you define that list, the better you're able to say, yep, you're the one. And that's the same thing, regardless if we're talking about buying cars or finding spouses or whatever. When we're looking at filling positions or jobs, the more specifically we know what we're looking for, the more specifically we know what this job does and what you need to be able to do to succeed in doing these things, the more likely we're going to have the right person. So again, going back to the way that most companies do it, most companies start off with a really bad job description that's pretty vague. And so they don't really know what they're looking for. And they hire somebody who seems to be okay. And then when we get them in that role, we find out that they can't really do what we need them to do. So we start off with a very good job description that's very, very clear on what this job does and what you need to do and know and have to be able to do this job well. And then we know how to go about interviewing people to see if they've got those skills and that knowledge and those abilities and so forth. And if we do that as a general practice as an organization, good job descriptions, very, very clear, specific criteria, then we have good interviews because we've gotten good candidates and we can get the best of the best and not just somebody who's okay. And then suddenly we find, as we do this over and over and over again, we build a staff, an organization of great people who are very competent, and our organization starts to outperform or overperform our competitors, which is what we're looking for. So there's a couple of different ways that we can approach staffing. There's the traditional staffing model, which we just described, and there's the strategic staffing model. And I want you to remember particularly the strategic staffing model. The traditional method, as we've talked about, doesn't really think about strategy. It doesn't really have a point to it. It's just a quick fix, knee-jerk reaction. Oh, somebody left, let's fill that position as quickly as we can. So it tends to be very haphazard. It is very reactive. It is very much response-oriented instead of future thinking. And we don't kind of think about how we did it the last time we hired and make changes for the next time. So we probably continue to do the same wrong things over and over and over again. That's traditional staffing. Strategic staffing is thinking ahead. We talked about that. It's looking at who might be leaving next year. This person is getting ready to have a baby. Maybe she's not going to want to come back. That's okay. Some people don't. Some people do. What are we going to do if she decides she's not? How are we going to fill that position in the short term? How are we going to fill that position in the long term? Susie over here is getting to the point where, she's going to want to start spending time with grandkids and she's going to think about retiring. What are we going to do? Maybe that's a year from now, maybe that's 5 years from now, but what are we going to do? So it's longer term planning. It's aligned with the strategy of the organization. It's aligned with the other areas of HR. We will find in later chapters that our staffing may come from outside the organization, or it might mean moving people around in the organization, promoting and transferring laterally and giving new job responsibilities. And so training is an important part of that. So we have to have good training functions and good appraisal functions to know who's capable of doing what in order to think about our staffing needs. So we have to be able to align the process of staffing with all these other things that we're doing already. But maybe the most important thing that summarizes all of it is that strategic staffing is very, very deliberate, and it is very, very well planned. And that means that it probably takes longer, but it generates better responses. We also want to talk a little bit about the steps in the strategic staffing process. The first step is planning, and in this planning stages, we think about what we have, because a lot of the people that we have, we can use in different ways. They come in as an accountant, but they've got the potential to be a manager or to be a VP or whatever. They come into to the warehouse, but they've got organizational skills and they've got planning skills and analytical skills that if they're not content being in the warehouse for a long period of time, we can move them into their position. So what talent do we have right now? It fits pretty well with where it is right now, but we could use that talent in other ways in the days to come. So what talent do we have, and what talent do we think we're going to need? Either in the near future, or maybe in the long-term future, or tomorrow. But planning is a big part of this. And as we've talked about to a great degree already, unfortunately, a lot of times we don't plan at all. We just kind of go about our daily routine, and suddenly something happens and we've got to respond to it. And it's not easy to respond because we haven't thought about it. We haven't planned for it. So planning, ongoing planning, constantly monitoring what talent we have, what we think is going to happen, what resources we have. The second step is sourcing. Sourcing is the idea that there is a place where these people are. We can't get them to apply if we don't let them know about our job. And we can't hope that they know about our job. We've got to find the sources for this talent. If we need an accountant, there are places where accounting people hang out. There's our societies and clubs and organizations that accounting people are a part of. There are certain schools that teach certain things better. If we need an engineer, there are certain schools that produce good engineers. If we need women, there are certain places where they're more likely to find women. If we need minorities, there are certain places where there are more likely to be the minorities that we need. But there are sources for each of these different things. So where do we go to find them? Instead of just hoping that they show up, if we have to go and tell them about this great job we have, where's the place that we go? Where do we find the good candidates? Where do we find the people who have the skills that we need and the abilities that we need, and where do they hang out? And then how can we go to them rather than hoping that they hear about us and come to us? If we really rely on people coming to us, we're never going to get the applicants that we need. We've got to go find them and convince them to come. And knowing where to go is what we refer to as sourcing. The third thing, once we have gone to them and made them aware, how do we then recruit them? How do we get them interested? They're not going to apply if they don't know about us, for sure. But there's also, even if they know about us, they're not going to apply if they're not interested. So how do we make them interested? How do we entice them to come and check this out? How do we get them to apply for our jobs? So we have planning, we have sourcing, we have recruiting, then we have selecting. When they have come, how do we decide which one's the best? How do we evaluate them? How do we score them? How do we analyze them? And of the ones who do apply, which one or which ones do we hire? Which ones are the best of the best? How do we go about selecting? Once we have selected them, how do we deploy them, or how do we use them? How do we put them in the proper roles? Maybe they've applied for this job, but in the process of analyzing them or selecting them, we go, you know what, you could do this job, but you could also do that job. So how do we decide which role to put them in to where it makes them the most fulfilled and it makes us the most fulfilled as well? And assuming that they are pretty good at a role, but they've got some potential that hasn't been tapped yet, how do we train them to be able to do that new role and to prepare for the next role? The last thing is retaining them, because it doesn't do us any good to bring somebody in if they're just going to leave. So how do we keep them engaged? How do we get them really excited about their job and liking their job and the people and the things? How do we reward them? How do we entice them to stay another year? How do we keep them with us long term? That's the process of strategic staffing. And there's a question related to this on the test as well. Understanding what the kind of roles are. In particularly, I think the sourcing is the idea of there are places where people congregate that have these skills. What's that source? Where do we find that source? How do we go to that source to find that group of people? You know, again, the accounting, the Society of Accountants, or whatever the terminology is, there's 1,000 people who are great candidates for our jobs. What's that source? How do we get into that source to let them know that we have a job available? I think that's the highlights of Chapter 1. There is no quiz related to Chapter 1, so you can go ahead and move on to Chapter 7 where there is a quiz. But with that understanding of strategic staffing and what it all looks like in the overall process, we're going to start digging in a little bit more to the pieces of it, the steps of it, so that you can begin to understand how you can do it well and be even more valuable to your organization as you go forward as a manager. Interested in your thoughts about this? If you don't really have any thoughts yet, store them away somewhere and move on to the next piece, and we'll start putting it all together as we go.